Belarus has begun carrying out joint air force drills with Russia. The military exercises will last for 2 weeks, and they come amid concerns that Moscow may be pressuring Minsk to joining the war in Ukraine. Well, the Belarusian Defence Ministry has insisted that the drills will be defensive in nature to prepare for possible combat missions. So let's cross over straight away to Kyiv to speak to our correspondent there, James Waterhouse. Whatever Minsk says, there will be a lot of concern in Ukraine.
Yeah, well, they often frame these joint military drills as defensive in response to aggression from Ukraine, in their words. But we have to remind ourselves that it is Ukraine that is continuing to come under Russia's invasion. And Belarus, its territory as well as airspace, has been used as a loading platform by Russian troops. Now, it is starting to feel a little bit 2022, this time last year, when many will remember the Kremlin was gathering troops on the border. There was a growing geopolitical crisis, and many wondered whether Vladimir Putin would actually do the unthinkable and launch a full-scale invasion. Joint exercises were announced in Belarus, and that brought Kyiv under direct threat, and we all know what happened after that. So it will be causing a lot of worry. But also, the fear is that Vladimir Putin of Russia is trying to pull or pressure Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus into his war effort by deploying Belarusian troops. Now, it's hard to visualize that at the moment. Alexander Lukashenko is seen as Europe's last dictator. He's been in power for a very long time. He survived a popular uprising in 2020. Not least in part to his alliance with Vladimir Putin. It is a country reliant on Russia in terms of energy. So that is a concern, but the reason why it's hard to visualize is because back in February the 24th, 2022, the day of the full-scale invasion, Russia deployed its most elite units, its best trained soldiers on the attack in the capital. That attack failed and Russia was defeated and forced to focus its efforts on the east. So it's hard to see that happening again, but of course it's a concern for Ukraine because Ukraine at the moment is concentrating its efforts in the east where there is the most intense fighting.
James, for the time being, thank you very much just for talking us through that. James Waterhouse there, my colleague in Kyiv. Thank you. We're going to keep the focus on this because I now want to speak to Alex Kokcharov, who's a country risk analyst at S&P Global Market Intelligence. Welcome. When it comes to Belarus saying this is purely defensive, we've heard the alarm bells that Kyiv has over what we're seeing, that joint military exercise between Belarus and Russia. What's your analysis of what we're witnessing here?
Well, of course, Belarus would say that this is defensive, and we obviously do not know what's happening behind the scenes. But based on the information available, including that which has been released by Ukrainian intelligence, there is no presence of combat forces placed in south of Belarus, which would present an immediate danger to Ukrainian territory. Ukraine is fully aware of the threats emanating from Belarus, including presence of Russian forces there, but also the Belarusian armed forces. And it is monitoring the developments and deployments there at great detail. I'm sure we would probably learn very quickly if Ukraine thought that there would be a risk of imminent invasion from the north towards Kyiv or other places in Ukraine.
So in that case, what is the thinking here? Is this just a showmanship of the support that Vladimir Putin has when it comes to Belarus's leader? Because, of course, we're thinking back to what happened. We saw a build-up. We saw these joint exercises last year, and then we did see that full-scale invasion of Russia, not Belarus, but Russia into Ukraine. And then we are obviously concerned about that, the ability for troops to go down from Belarus to target Kyiv. I wonder what is in it for both Russia and Belarus to have these joint exercises if there isn't an incursion from the north?
Most probably it's part of the Russian deception tactic. The fact that there is this military activity happening within Belarus, it forces Ukrainians to keep quite significant armed forces along the Belarus-Ukraine border, and it's a very lengthy border, more than 1,000 kilometers long. And it means that these forces cannot be redeployed elsewhere, including to Donetsk region, where we've seen very heavy fighting happening near Bakhmut and other frontline locations. So it's most probably part of the Russian deception plan, which necessitates Ukrainian troop redeployments away from the areas where Russians are attempting to advance.
Help us to understand just how tied together Belarus and Russia are. We saw the summer of 2020 when we had the weaponization of migrants coming from the Middle East, going to Minsk, then being pushed to the border, driven to the border with Poland. And the argument was then that it was Putin who was not organising, but pressurising Minsk in order to do this. How tied together, how much influence is Lukashenko under when it comes to Putin?
Belarus and Russia are allies in all respects, military, political and economic. And Lukashenko is very isolated on the international scene, which means that he can only rely on continued financial assistance only on Russia. And we've seen that throughout 2022, there was increasing pressure from Russia to create conditionality to this support so that Russia would also gain something from this. And we've seen that in December, Putin and also Russian foreign and defense ministers traveled together to Minsk for talks with Lukashenko and his government. And Belarus is effectively a vassal state of Russia, which is under a lot of political pressure to act very much in line with the Russian wishes.